Hello. Today I have Emeritus Professor Gary Martin from the Australian Institute of Management in WA joining us on the Business Growth Mindset podcast. Professor Gary Martin commenced in the role of Chief Executive and Executive Director of the Australian Institute of Management in 2012. He has overall responsibility for leading all aspects of the Institute's business, which is focused on building leadership, management, and workplace capability, both in Australia and internationally. A workplace specialist, Gary focuses on key issues and challenges facing organisations and their people. He is a regular columnist in a variety of publications across Australia and internationally, covering a broad range of workplace issues, including ageism, bullying, flexible working, and building respect. Gary was a board chair of the Telephone Speech and Hearing in Perth from 2016 to 2020, and the chair of Study Perth from 2008 to 2011. He now sits on the boards of the Council for the Ageing WA and Volunteering WA. A fellow of the Australian College of Educators, Gary is Emeritus Professor of Murdoch University's Business School and the Xinjiang University of Technology in China, as well as the Honorary Professor at Guangzhou University of Business Studies, China. Get comfortable and listen up, because today you will learn about the power of developing a workplace that matters, what it takes to become a leader in education, and how to build a legacy.
Welcome to another episode of the Business Growth Mindset Podcast, series number 3. I'm your host, Christian Lavolsi, and I am incredibly excited to welcome our guest and my friend, Professor Martin, on the show today. Gary, welcome.
Thank you very much, Christian. I'm excited to be here too. I've been hoping that we could have a chat for some time, but we seem not to have been able to do that. So delighted that we're doing it right now.
No, and look, we just had a little off-air discussion. As everybody knows on my podcast, I always love a chat. So we just had a really good chat, and I got some excellent insight, and I'm hoping that we're going to develop that insight on today's call. But before we dive in, I just want to thank you for making yourself available. You are in Perth, and I'm in Adelaide, so there is a time difference, and I know that you're also incredibly busy in your role. I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about you, introduce yourself to my audience, or to our audience, but from that place of, I guess, where you've come from and where you are today.
Thanks, Christian. Where I've come from, a little bit entrepreneurial in a sense that I was selling newspapers from when I was around 12, 13, and I was selling newspapers, the afternoon newspaper as it was there in one of the shopping centres. And I kind of took over the entire shopping centre round, so that I was the preferential deliverer for most of the shops in this giant shopping centre. And I got a taste of that in terms of trying to provide better service and so on to all of my customers at that young age of 12. That really, I think, was a good starting point. You were dealing with money. The harder you worked at that time, the more money you could make. And it was all came down to reliability with your customer and giving good service. And I think that holds no matter what you're doing in any career, in any job, in any role. And that's something that I just continued on. So from there, I actually took a step into becoming a primary school teacher. And I credit that background for my success in terms of being organised, being able to interact with people from different backgrounds and so on, because being a primary school teacher really helps hone those particular skills. You have to adjust your level of communication to children, your vocab, you have to change that again for your colleagues. And of course, you have to really hone your interpersonal skills when you're working with parents as well and others in the community. So from going from a teacher, I did that for some time and then went into teacher education, then on to managing a research centre and on to taking a role in university admin. Sometimes people call that the dark side, or you've crossed to the dark side. And I did that, really enjoyed it. was actually quite surprised how difficult and how challenging being a leader in university was. But that was also part of the joy of actually being a leader, because it wasn't, just do things, it happens. You had to actually really work at it, had to think about how you'd actually lead a group of very, very smart people who all had views on how things should be done. And I guess that was the satisfying thing, is trying to try and take from different views to come up with a particular approach. And so I said right through from being a newspaper or having a newspaper round, to becoming a teacher, to going into universities. Then I made this jump out of a university into the Australian Institute of Management in Western Australia, where I'm CEO at the moment. And I've been doing this for 10 years, and I kind of feel like this is the place where I belong. I love what I do. I love stimulating conversations about workplaces and leadership, management, and hearing people's different views. And I think I'm really privileged as well, because since I've been in this role, as I said, for 10 years, I have so many people tell me, either online or face-to-face, the sorts of experiences that they have in their workplace. So I've geared our business up to help to inspire better workplaces, whether it's in corporate sector, not-for-profit, charitable, government. That's what we do here, and I love doing that.
That sounds... I love that, inspiring better workplaces. And I mean, congratulations on your 10-year tenure. Have you taken your long service leave?
No, because I just clicked over to 10 years. Right. I had a few clickovers, if you like. This year I clicked over, I turned 60.
Oh, wow. It's interesting. I would never have picked 60. I would have picked 50. So
very kind.
The camera, generous. You know how the cameras make us look better? You can put that brushing effect.
Yes.
I've got mine set on the high setting.
So my
congratulations
coincided with my 10th year here as the CEO of Australian Institute of Management WA. And as I said, it's a great role that I have, because every year is different, particularly over the last couple of years.
Can I ask you a question? How many people does AIM, if I can just use the acronym, in WA, how many students do you put through as a collective, not depending on
probably between 15,000 and 20,000 people per year. And that's because we have things like one-day courses through to, you can do a Master of Business Administration with us through the Australian Institute of Management Business School. So it's all up, it's around 20,000. But some of them only are spending, an afternoon with us, and some of them are spending a couple of years with us. So it does vary, but all up about 15,000.
I guess it's the magnitude of the organisation. Like, it's still 15, 20,000 students coming through, whether it's a day or, or 2 or 3 year course.
Yeah.
It's still a significant number. And I mean, has that fluctuated? I mean, I don't know what the impact for you guys has been with COVID and international students of any kind. Have you been impacted by that as well?
Yeah, look, we've been impacted right across the board. Not so much last year, but the year before, and that comes down to there were not people coming to us from overseas like they used to. When the people that come from overseas might come for a week intensive type of short course, leadership course. We had delegations that come to us, for a couple of weeks at a time. We've been doing a China oil and gas program funded by the government, where we used to have 60-odd Chinese oil and gas professionals come and spend 3 months with us, and they're not coming at the moment, obviously. So on the international front, yes, but even our local business, there were people working from home, and because people were working from home, they weren't getting out and about, and that includes doing training or learning and development stuff, unless it was virtual. And one of the most interesting things, though, was that when people did come back to do face-to-face, we still had virtual offerings as well as face-to-face offerings, but everybody wanted to come back to the face-to-face offerings, and a very small percentage of people did the virtual offerings. So, yes, our business did get impacted significantly, probably not last year, but the year before. because people were very cautious about going into these sorts of settings.
Do you think you're a better organisation having gone through those challenges?
Look, in lots of different ways, I think we are. We've been through a lot of change in the last few years anyway, from, I guess, changing in terms of how we structure our business, how we in fact rebuild our business. And that means not just looking at what extra products we have or what extra services that we have. We've also spent a lot of time looking at how we sell those products and services as well. So it's not a one-size-fits-all model when it comes to people buying. And I think that became very clear, that people not only have different needs in terms of what you have and what they want from you, but also in how you deliver it, but also how they buy it as well, whether they wanted to buy, a big block of training versus, just a tiny little bit to serve a particular purpose. So we have rethought a lot of what we've actually done. We've even expanded our professional membership as well, quite significantly. People's roles have changed here as well. Quite a lot of change, and all due, I think, due to the pandemic in a large way, because our customers have changed, our staff have changed, our partners have changed, everything's changed.
I mean, the reason why I asked that question, obviously, as a strategist and growth advisor, I've seen transformations, right? And the companies that have used this opportunity to transform,
yes,
have accelerated in growth. And it's really interesting because occasionally I hear from people who decided that, maybe I wasn't the right fit on their journey. And
yes,
then they're like, that was a really bad mistake we made. And I'm like, what do you mean? They said, well, all the things you told us to do, we just thought they were ridiculous, so we didn't do them. And I sat there and I said, so hang on, you didn't do any of the things that I gave you in that initial consultation, not one of them. He goes, no. And I said, so how's your business now? Not good. And because I love giving value to people like you do. You put a lot of content out on LinkedIn. Both of us actually do. We sometimes saturate the platforms, but that's because we want to share, right? Like I want to share my knowledge with the world. There's no value in keeping it bottled up. And I think that's the wonderful thing about being an educator, rather than an academic. But I guess and I guess this is a follow-on question, Gary. What's the biggest challenge in your career that you have faced, or even maybe one that you're facing at the moment, right? And I guess, how have you tackled it, or how are you tackling it?
Yeah, look, I've got a little. One of the challenges that we've faced, or I've faced, is when the pandemic hit here. It did cause a huge impact on our business, and that included letting a lot of people go, basically. And that was very challenging in itself. But at the same time as that, I had to actually provide for people that were left behind as well. I mean, if I give you an example of what happened with our business, is that when people stop coming through the door, there's no money coming in to pay all of the bills, and that includes salaries. So in a sense, I think that that was really challenging, because we did have to lose. We lost about a third of our staff, which ended up. That sounds horrible, but it ended up being quite a good result, because it could have been a lot worse than that.
Yeah.
And I think the way that I was able to deal with those sorts of things, and I've taught this over a period of time, is you just can't overthink things. If you start to overthink things, then what happens is you'll do yourself a major disservice, and you'll spiral into negativity, or starting to question yourself about whether you did the right or the wrong thing. So overthinking things is really very dangerous. It doesn't mean you don't think. It means you think about things before you make decisions. You give it a little bit of reflection after you've you reflect a little bit on those decisions after when you witness the impact. But then if you continue on and overthink things, you spiral downwards, and that's not good for anyone, not good for yourself, not good for your business, and not good for the people that you actually work with. So I think there was an element of resilience to the situation, mainly because I applied this don't overthink, what happens if I did this, how would this have been different, how would that have been different, and trying to just accept and be comfortable with the decisions that you've made along the way and that you've already put a lot of thought into. So that was, pretty much how I dealt with that challenge, because nobody likes to say goodbye to people that they've been working with for, a long period of time. But that had to happen. Otherwise, we wouldn't be, here today.
And, it's interesting. I love the way you put that. And I think that the key points there is, don't fall victim to analysis paralysis,
Sure.
Right? The overthinking, but also more importantly, execution is critical.
Yes.
And I know that, using the word execution when we're letting go of a third of our stuff.
Not such a good choice.
Not a great choice of words, but the reality of it is, as leaders, we have to make calls and we have a duty. Right? I, as a professional chair and director, have a fiduciary responsibility or duty as well. And, the reality of it is, if we hadn't made those decisions, where would we be? And it wouldn't be pretty, right? So, and a lot of it, there wasn't a handbook that anyone could go to. And, a lot of people criticize governments, criticize politicians. And, I've kind of sat there and I've said to everyone, how would you have done it? At the end of the day, some calls can be questioned. Yes. And each premier in each state has been very different.
Yes.
I'm not going to get into politics. But I think you've got to, everyone has to make a decision in that moment. And I think the danger is when you listen also to too many people. And that can happen. I'm assuming you've got a board that you report to.
I do, yes.
Yeah. So, they've got to discharge their duties. They've got to support you. Yes. They're relying on you as essentially their manager.
That's right.
To give them the advice. And, I saw so many people panic through that time. And I love the word, resilience. And, to me, everyone that knows me knows I had a field day during COVID because, I'm the guy you want in a difficult situation because I don't panic. I don't, having had my own fair share of failures in my life, the pandemic was a big one. And, I'm a chairman of a day hospital. So I had to deal with, vulnerable patients. Yeah. And people said to me, what's your position on vaccination? I said, well, let me tell you this. Before we even knew what was happening, I implemented a mandatory vaccination policy in the entire facility. Right? The CEO and I just went, nah, we've got cancer patients. And people looked at me and went, really? I said, doesn't matter what my opinion is. I've got the best interests of my patients and my staff that I've got to focus on. And I said, but let's go and talk to everyone and see what they think. And, amazingly, because of the environment we're in, a lot of people were like, hey, Christian, great decision. And, it's funny then, we had other hospitals coming to us for advice saying, why are you guys so far ahead of the game? We implemented mandatory rat testing in December.
Yes.
And for patients and all staff. And everyone was like, what are you doing? We wore the cost. So it was a huge cost. But, to keep our patients safe, we've got a very philosophy on that duty. And, our patients love us for that reason. And, and I sit there and I said to the CEO, I said, Lauren, you make really good calls. And she goes, oh, we're a good team. I said, when are we going to actually, I said this the other day, when are we going to actually stop doing rats? I said, it's becoming a bit of a burden on the finances, right? And she said, we'll do them as long as we have to. And I love that because the CEO is also the owner. So it's kind of this really interesting relationship. And what I love about her is money comes second, patients come first. And that's another, value. And in your case, you had to protect the interests of the other 2/3 of team that were working there. And so, it's wonderful to hear that, and a challenge for all. Now, Gary, if I can, what should I ask you that I don't know enough to ask?
I don't. I always look at people's work ethic, and there's a perception that we as leaders should be managing something like work-life balance, and I think I've got particular views on that, which I don't think you would necessarily understand. So I can elaborate on that.
I'm smiling because I think I might enjoy listening to what you've got to say. So our listeners might too, especially all the entrepreneurs and business owners out there. Yeah. There might be some good value in this. So please elaborate. Love to know.
Yeah, look, I think we've got into this situation now, and if you're on LinkedIn, you'll see, or other social media, you'll see people always talk about people's work-life balance, which I think is an absolutely stupid concept. I understand where it comes from, but I think it's a stupid concept, because the whole idea of work-life balance, there's so many flaws there. Just two. One of them is that some people view work-life balance as 8 hours of work, 8 hours of leisure, 8 hours of sleep, and your life or your day is divided up that way. Now, if anybody has that sort of nice mixture, then good on them, but I've never seen it. Okay, so it would be a miracle if anybody's life actually is like that, for a start.
Yeah.
The second thing is that about this concept of work-life balance is that people tend to think that that having that means that, it's a goal to strive for. But hey, if I like what I do, then I might have quite a different balance. And my work might be part of my life because I love it so much. So for those people, you want everybody to love what they do, but not to actually say, well, I'm out of balance because I'm spending 16 hours loving what I'm doing, but I should really not do that. How does that work? If you're enjoying doing something, why wouldn't you spend more time? And, the other flaw with this thing is that work and life are two different things. And of course, we spend a big part of our life working. So, I think the concept and people's efforts very well intentioned, but I think what we should be doing instead is, and I do this myself, is really embrace something that's more about one flowing into the other. So I might work straight, and any entrepreneur who's, limited resources doing it themselves, you might work 12-hour days for 6 days. And then you might say, okay, well, I've got through that. Now I'm going to have 3 full days of doing other stuff. And I think that's because it's work-life flow rather than balance. One sort of, sometimes you have to tend to some things in your life, and sometimes you have to tend to others. So being present in different parts of your life at different times, but they're all your life. You just change your presence. Sometimes your work requires more. Sometimes your family, your friends, your relatives, whatever else requires more. And you balance time that way instead of this 8 hour or whatever. And the fascinating thing is every year people set themselves up with a New Year's resolution, which is, I'm going to have a better work-life balance, only to fail within weeks of doing it because they go back to work and the demands are big. But if you can just view it as seasons in your life, where sometimes you have to focus more on one area than others, and then it sort of changes and things switch back to the more personal type of life stuff. But for many people, the personal life and their work life are one and the same. So I just think, the more and more we talk about work-life balance, the more we're actually setting people up for failure, particularly now when a lot of people were working from home, their lives just ended up blending with their work. So let's face it, that's going to be ongoing because technology enables us to do stuff at any time of the day. So how do we actually work with that rather than fight it the whole time? I'm still thinking through these issues.
Oh, look, can I tell you something? You put that far more eloquently than I do. And people, everyone that knows me, even my listeners on the podcast, there is no such thing as work-life balance. Right? So, funnily enough, we have exactly the same view. I'm a big believer, and I love the word flow. I use the word flow when people are resisting me, and I'm always like, okay, let's get you into a flow. Right? Stop pushing back for no reason, right? You're not allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough. And so, but the truth behind that is everyone wants to box this shit up, right? That's the problem. They want to put it into a box, and lots of people have made a lot of money from time management, right? And a lot of money from work-life balance, right? I have a different concept of it. My concept is really simple. Do what you love for people that love what you do.
That's right.
You will be in a happy place.
Yeah.
Surround yourself with the 5 people that drive you, inspire you, and motivate you to success. And you will be in your own state of flow. That's why I love what you said. People always come to me and they're like, you work so much. I'm like, really? I actually don't work at all. Like, I get paid a ridiculous amount of money to do what I love, to help other people grow, to help other people achieve their dreams. I mean, and as the phrase above my head says, my purpose statement is to live with purpose.
Purpose, yes.
Like, essentially, I own the strap line. Like, we're in the process of finalising trademarks in 18 countries. Like, to me, it's something, I've said that my whole life. Tony Robbins says live with passion. And I think sometimes when I must have heard a Tony Robbins cassette back in 90 cassette, by the way, younger listeners, is this thing with 2 little knobs on it that used to sit inside of a car. Gary and I definitely know what a cassette is. I used to be a concierge in Sydney. And every time a really nice car used to turn up, we'd say to the valet, listen, we're going to take that for a drive. And you wouldn't believe it. These high-level success, I'm talking, a Porsche would turn up, like an old vintage Porsche that had a cassette player, and Tony Robbins would be playing it. This gigantic man. And I'd be sitting there going, this is the late-night TV guy. And I would always hear this line, live with passion, live with passion. And I think that one day just hit me when I said, no, you got to live with purpose. And purpose and passion are not the same. And I think Tony sums it up. But for me, when you are living with purpose and you're in your own state of flow, the balance is a natural balance. You take a little from column A, you take a little from column B. I mean, I've got young children, and, my children and I have a wonderful relationship. Lucy and I have a wonderful relationship. It's, why? Because when you're there, you've got to be present.
That's right.
That's how you achieve great balance. Not to digress, but something that impacted me dramatically was Shane Warne's memorial.
Yes.
And I actually tweeted and I wrote, there's not many people I would have wished I'd met. And this is one of them. Because when I heard the memorial, I said, Warnie lived the life I want to live. Like, and why? He not only was this incredibly gifted man that could do things with a ball, but he was an exceptionally loved father and human being. And I think that, if he epitomized what living for legacy is, but without actually he didn't force that. It's like, I just want to be the best father. And you think about it, this is a man who traveled almost all year round.
Yes.
And for his children to adore him the way they did speaks volumes. Sure, he wasn't a great husband, right? And he admitted that, I think, in one of the tapes they showed. But the reality of it is, when you know what you're on this earth to do, and this is what I say to a lot of the executives that I work with, they're like, Christian, I came to you for business growth. You've totally transformed me as a human. And I'm like, mate, you were working in a job that was driving you crazy, a company you owned, because when you started it, you were in love with what you wanted to do.
Yes.
And it became work.
Yes.
What I try and do is I try and transform people to make it's not work anymore. You got to love it. And sometimes you need, that independence, someone coming in over the top. I mean, you know this because you, as you said, you have the privilege, Gary, of working with so many people that are doing the MBAs, a lot of business owners, I would assume, come through AIM. That's the Australian Institute of Management in WA. And that's a privilege to get to serve these people and help them on their plight to, a greater life. So I love that you just added that. I mean, to me, that is the gold in this podcast today, is that work-life balance actually isn't a thing. It's what it is for you that matters. And just making sure you're driven by good values. Now, talking about customers or students in your case, tell me about a situation or a customer that touched your heart, and tell me about a customer that changed your business. I'd love to understand that.
That's an interesting one. And I've written about this quite a bit. Is the customers that really I feel like I need to do more with are people who come in, particularly people in their 50s and 60s, who have basically been cast aside by employers. And it's something that I have written about. It's actually ageism at work, in the workplace, ageism and at work in the workplace, where, as soon as people are in their 50s and 60s, the idea is to push them out the door as quick as possible and have younger blood, if you like, come in. And the stories that I hear from some people that have experienced ageism either while in the workplace or trying to get a job, they're really heartbreaking, because here we have, a big chunk of society trying to do their best, get some meaningful work, support themselves rather than ultimately go into welfare and so on, yet there's pushback in some quarters, and people have got this stereotype, which I don't think is actually getting better. At one stage, I thought it was getting better, but I just hear so many stories of people saying that, they're passed over for promotions, they're passed over for training, they're passed over for any number of things in the workplace. But even worse, when they try to get a job after they've left an organisation, the ageist attitudes that prevail. And the irony is we all belong to that group of older aged Australians at some point, if we're lucky. If we're lucky, we get into that group. And so we discriminate ourselves, our younger selves, against something that we're going to become part of. Now, not everyone is ageist. And ageist actually does work two ways as well, because you can discriminate against young people. But the people that have really, touched my heart have been the people that have actually come in to see me and say, Gary, I can't get a job. What can I do? And so, my approach to helping them has actually been a very personalised approach. I've been through their CVs. I've helped to set them up in some networks. In some cases, I've helped people to improve their presence on social media. It's those sorts of things. The irony of that is quite often they're not paying customers because they're unemployed, but they're clients, they're people at the end of the day.
And that's a social. That's a social good, right? Like, we all do it. And I think that's really the ageist thing is a bit like the discrimination around gender, right? Like,
yes,
I've got a very, very strong view on this, and 85% of my clients are actually females. Mm-hmm. So it surprises people, because they're like, you're such an alpha and male, and then yet all your clients are women. And I said, not all, but 85%, the majority. And and these are business owners, super successful. They don't actually need me most of the time. But the reality of it is, I have this very strict policy, where you hire the best person. No, age is not, the grey hairs, as I call them, like me. I shaved my head today, so you can't see it, but you can see it in the beard. The grey hairs like me, and I'm only 44, right? So they can bring a huge amount of wealth to the table. I mean, some of my best people that I've hired are in their 60s.
Yes.
And from other industries too, because it's like, tell me what you bring. Now, I'm a visionary, and I'm assuming you're the same. So we look beyond the box. And, to me, that's so important. I wish that people realize what they're leaving on the table. But again, you got to, as I said, I'm a big, firm believer. You employ the absolute very best person for that role, and you close your eyes and you ignore their gender, you ignore their preferences, and you ignore all of those things. But there's only one caveat. They have to be the right fit for your organization.
Yes.
So because everything I do is centered around the core, so purpose, values, and competencies, as long as they fit that core, the rest is irrelevant, because you can train anybody to do any task. Okay, correction. I can't teach someone who's been a Boilermaker to be a surgeon, okay? I'm referring to, I just have to put these caveats because there is always a whole bunch of people waiting to hit me up with something I've said. But the reality of it is, my thing around that is you've got to give people the opportunity. If they're the right fit for your organization,
yes,
think of the value they can bring to you in so many ways. And I really appreciate that you're taking that role on to be a voice for those people, because it's again, and I said this to someone that I interviewed the other day, success is not a measure of wealth. Success is a measure of the legacy we leave behind.
Yes.
Right? I have my own corporate social responsibility program. I coach 2 people for free every 12 weeks. They have to pass a means test. If they can't afford it, then absolutely. And, most of those have gone on to becoming paying customers because, to me, my dream is not about the money. It's to help them live their dream, live their purpose, come out and deliver on your promises. And I love that, Gary. So thank you for sharing that with us. If you could turn back the time, right? Everyone loves this question. If you could turn back the time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell them?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because on the one hand, I would tell myself that I did the right thing, or that I should become a teacher and work through those through those channels to get where I am today in terms of what I do, and I enjoy what I do. However, there's another side to me that would say I perhaps would have liked to have studied law. So I would have encouraged myself to study law, because I actually feel like I could have made a contribution there. I feel like it's an area of interest. I think I've got the resilience and the stamina to be in that profession. I don't know for sure, but I would have told myself to take that direction, which would have ended up completely different for me, I'm sure. But at that point in my time, 18, teaching seemed achievable. Being a lawyer didn't.
Cool. Gary, you still have plenty of years left in you. You could do a 3-year law degree.
Yes, but the problem is now I'm too ingrained in doing what I do, which I love what I want to do, I'm doing, and I don't have that same interest or passion for that anymore. But I would.
It's interesting you say that. Sorry, it's interesting you say that. I'm umming and ahhing at the moment about going to do a law degree just because I'm surrounded by lawyers a lot because of the line of work that I'm in, the consulting. So we've got lots of legal firms. And I sometimes wonder if I know more about the law already than the lawyers themselves. And a lot of them always say to me, you quote the Corporations Act.
Yes.
Like no other. I said, no, there are barristers that quote it much better than I do. Yes. I said, but, there's not that many points you have to remember, right? But the thing is that if you want to do your job, it's really important. And, look, I did law as one of my subjects in my MBA, and I actually really enjoyed it. And I had a very good professor that was very understanding of my learning disabilities, as I call it, my ability to accept fact. And that's the hardest thing about the law. But Gary, what's the most important thing that you've learned in your life?
I think one of the things that I've only realised later in my life is that there's a movement around something that I'd call positive toxic positivity, where we're not allowed to be negative. We've got a fear of being negative in a situation. And I think over the last 5 years, or particularly the last 3 years, I've actually learned that when someone is experiencing difficulty, you can give a little bit of positive reassurance, but too much of it doesn't serve. You're better off to try and empathise with people rather than saying, oh, things are going to get better, or, you've had a bad run, now you're going to have a good run. I don't sometimes think we say the right things when people are experiencing hardship, like you lose your job, the job that you love, and someone says, oh, there'll be another opportunity coming up for you, rather than at that time when someone tells you that, you say, oh, that must be really hard for you. I can't imagine what that's like. That hasn't happened to me. But, you take a different tack. And I think that I've learned over a period of time that we have, meaning humans, seem to have this fear of negativity, that you can't be negative. And now I kind of stop and think about what I say to people when they are experiencing hardship, rather than trying to be positive and boost them up. That's not what they necessarily need at a particular time. I like to look at it as like a cake. If you feed someone a piece of cake, if they like cake, then that's just enough for them. If you give them 2 pieces of cake or 2 pieces of positivity, then it starts to make them feel, like
sluggish and
no more. If you feed them the whole cake, then they're going to be sick. Okay, so it's too much. And so it's the same with positivity. You give them a slither and you empathise rather than trying to load them up on positivity. They don't need false hope at that particular time because you don't know where the future lies, but they need empathy. And I think empathy is underrated in many situations.
It's funny, when you were saying that, I just wrote the word empathy. As soon as you said toxic positivity, I wrote the word empathy, because I actually, reflecting on my time at the university, that was a really big area, particularly in startup land when I was the entrepreneur in resident. And that was actually something I learned in my MBA.
Yes.
So it was one. I'm pretty sure it was under the leadership, and it was. I found that really interesting, because I was like, hang on a second, you're telling me that I actually can help someone acknowledge their situation,
yes,
and comfort them in the acknowledgement without me saying I understand,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
And then actually smack them between the eyeballs on reality,
yes,
and then hopefully find a path for them to move forward. And I remember my professor looking at me going, I just love the way you just make that so challenging. And I said, wow, this is kind of cool. Like, demonstrate empathy, right? Don't feel sorry for them. They're not victims, right? Shit's real.
Yes.
And then move on. And I love the way you put that. So thank you again for sharing that. Now, we're almost out of time. You have a busy schedule. So I'm going to ask you 5, what I call the fast 5 in 5.
Yes.
Unfortunately, here you can't demonstrate your academic pronouns, because I need you to do it quickly. So what makes you feel inspired?
Hearing other people's stories of inspiration. Inspiration breeds inspiration.
Excellent. What is the best compliment that you have ever received?
Best compliment, maybe when people tell me, or quite often tell me when they've read something that I've written, that it resonated with them, they related to it. That's enough. That's a huge compliment if you've been able to tune into people's thoughts and experiences.
Okay, fabulous. If you could be remembered for one thing, Gary, what would it be?
Making better workplaces in my professional life. That's what I would want. I would want people to look at me and say, you helped make my working life better.
Yeah, I really go back to what you said at the beginning. You inspire better workplaces, and I think
we try to anyway.
Yeah, well, that's inspirational. It's really sat with me the entire time. Best book recommendation?
Now that's challenging, because I tend to be reading, more the fiction, non-fiction type stuff, more informational type stuff. So I'd be hard pressed to pull out any one leadership type of text. But one that I actually did read was, I can't remember the author, but I know it's recently, and again, it's a non-fiction rather than fiction. It's actually about fasting and the benefits of fasting. And if I remember the name of the doctor that actually wrote that book, that had a huge impact on how I view my health. It's about fasting.
Maybe you could share it with me in an email, because I'd love to be able to put it in the show notes.
I read it on a plane. It's that sort of thing.
Great. That'd be awesome. And finally, if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
I would to go back to my other answer, I'd have a huge billboard that says "Inspire Better Workplaces," mainly because work's a very big part of everyone's lives.
I love it. Gary, Professor Gary Martin, CEO of the Australian Institute of Management in WA. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. It really has. And from the bottom of my heart and my listeners, thank you. I also want to take this time to thank our listeners, and we do value you. And we know that there are hundreds and thousands of other podcasts that they could be listening to, but you have chosen ours today. And hopefully Gary's story has inspired you to inspire better workplaces. That's something that's really resonated with me. And as I encourage all of you to jump into our show notes after the show. Gary's URL for LinkedIn will be there. He's a hugely a top voice in 2018. You write, I think you've published like 160 articles. You now know that if you want to get Gary's attention, all you have to do is tell him that you love his writing, and it actually has resonated with you.
Resonate. Yes.
Yeah. So if you start seeing my name all over Gary's wall, that is going to be the phrase that I'll be writing. But no, truthfully, Gary, thank you so much that you've been with us. I also want to thank my team, because they put up with me, and I use the word for their support and resilience all the time. But also, before I let you go, Gary, I just want to let our listeners know that if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so. And remember to change those notification settings, because otherwise you're going to miss future episodes, and we don't want that, do we? So, Gary, again, thank you very much. I appreciate your time today. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time, live with purpose.